Hey Mike here. Let's talk about ancient technology. Technology that ancient people had. So this ancient technology might have actually been equal to or even greater than the modern technology that we enjoy today. And the evidence for this is everywhere. There, I said it. Now let me explain why it advanced to the levels that it did, how we know that it did, and I'll even show you some examples of some of the cool technologies that ancient people had. Now this isn't some dumb video about stone cutting or pyramids either. I'm talking about electronics, air travel, advanced weaponry, and more. Estimating the pre-flood population levels does involve some assumptions, but it is very important. Now the Bible doesn't provide exactly detailed data on the birth rates and ages of people outside of Israel and the pre-Hebraic cultures, but you can extrapolate some data based on the ages of people that were mentioned and the number of children that they had and how long it took them to reproduce and how long they lived. So you get a world population of roughly 4 billion to 4.5 billion. And that's roughly what it was in the 1980s in the modern era. So why is this important? It's back to the population density. You get a lot of people living together and you need to develop agriculture. And then you get a more urban setting and people begin to need wheels or a cart to carry food even further on. Then over time you make some kind of engine. You might start with a horse-drawn carriage, but then you need a steam engine or gasoline engine, and then you need roads, of course, and then a communications network to organize logistics from contacting people to the GPS tracking. And these GPS systems will require rocketry. Eventually, these rockets will be used for war, especially as the growing population starts running out of resources. That's what most wars today are about. So you might as well put a nuclear warhead on that rocket, as they did in the ancient past. And I'll show you that. But let's take a look at communications first. Ancient smartphones. Thousands of years ago, in the sands of Egypt, the art of crystal glazing emerged as a profound practice. It flourished during the reign of the pharaohs, and the ancient roots date back to the time of the Old Kingdom, which almost immediately followed the Great Deluge, which occurred roughly 2,500 years ago. Years before that, I mean. Crystal gazing began a part of the very fabric of the spiritual and mystical traditions across the centuries of ancient Egypt. Egyptian priests and seers practiced crystal gazing using polished surfaces. Often obsidian was popular, or other crystals, and they would use it to divine information. These reflective surfaces were thought to enhance the spiritual connection, giving access to all kinds of knowledge, from remote viewing to gaining knowledge, and even communicating across great distances. There are tons of myths about this. And it wasn't just the Egyptians, though. It was also the ancient Mesopotamians, the ancient Greeks, and the practice even found its way into medieval Europe and the Renaissance. We have records going back almost 5,000 years. Up until then, it was just a few hundred years ago, all of this magical technology appeared. At least we think it did. So using these methods, the ancient people believed they could receive messages or visions from the divine. Mirrors, often made of black obsidian or polished metal, were believed to reveal glimpses of the future and insights into the unknown when someone gazed into it with intent. Practitioners, including alchemists and magicians, they utilized mirrors in their rituals to access hidden knowledge. The specific practice and materials used across these cultures and time periods varied, of course, but the underlying concept of gazing into a reflective surface to gain insights persisted through the ages. And that is actually because it came from a small kernel of truth that came from a time before the flood. You actually have a black reflective surface that you stare into on a daily basis to gain knowledge. This is knowledge you don't have, and it could even somewhat tell the future in some ways, especially with the weather. And you even use it to let you see people that are far away or talk to them. You perform a daily ritual, which energizes it, and this is of course your smartphone. Now imagine that all electronics go away. Perhaps a devastating worldwide flood, or maybe a EMP blast, which civilization does not recover quickly from. Now imagine years go by and you're telling your great-grandchildren about this amazing object you used to have. But keep in mind they had never used anything that runs on electricity, never even encountered electricity, never seen a computer, never encountered the internet, and had never even used artificial light. How do you explain this device? Go ahead and stop right here for a moment and consider that. And actually let me know in the comments how you would describe this. Explain the internet, electricity, lithium-ion batteries, the screen on your smartphone, the daily ritual of placing it on a charger. What does the screen look like? How does the AI inside of it, which accepts voice commands, or in some cases even eye tracking to control it? How does all this work? Explain this to someone who had never encountered any electricity in their life. And explain how you can actually communicate with people face to face through it, even when they're on a different continent. So, you might say something along the lines of, listen up, let me tell you a tale from before the world knew this darkness and silence. Long ago, there was this incredible object called a smartphone. It was like a magical window into a world of wonders that, unfortunately, you've never known. Imagine a slab of sapphire, smooth and glossy, layers of silicon crystals underneath it, and the slab had its own memory and even a mind of its own of sorts. But the real magic happened when connected to a special pedestal. This pedestal sent energy that was not visible to the eye, but it would flow through tiny pathways into another chunk of silicon crystal. We call this energy electricity. Every day, you place it on the pedestal to charge it up, and it's like giving it a good night's rest. Now, the screen on these devices wasn't just any screen. It was like having a piece of the future in your hands, showing you messages, pictures, and a wealth of information, and it'd even tell you what the weather was going to be. And get this. Inside this smartphone was something called an artificial intelligence. It was like a little brain that could understand our voices. This inanimate object would have a mind of its own. You could talk to it and it would respond. It would help you connect with people face to face, even though they're on a different continent. And you could even tap into a vast network of information, something called the internet, to learn anything in just seconds. It spanned across the entire globe, reaching places like Mars and the Moon also. So that's the story of the smartphone, a piece of magic that connected us to the world and beyond. But then one day, Great Flood, EMP blast, something knocked it all out, and we're just left with memories of a time when such marvels existed. So that's the story you would tell. The internet becomes as magical to them as the mythical Akashic records, which did the exact same thing to us. The ancients believed in the Akashic records, which they could access through various methods of staring into these devices. And that could have actually been an ancient internet. And keep in mind, the internet existed in the 80s. Population density drives technology, and the population before the flood was roughly that of the 1980s. So let's look at remote controls. In Mesopotamia, priests and rulers often used ceremonial staffs as a symbol of authority and conduits for divine power. The Sumerian caduceus of Ningistida. Okay, this was a staff of intertwined serpents, often associated with one of their gods and depicted in various artworks. You've probably seen this on an ambulance. Similarly, in ancient Egypt, pharaohs and priests utilized ceremonial staffs known as scepters. These staffs symbolized power and dominion and were believed to be infused with divine authority. They were prominently featured in hieroglyphics and temple reliefs. Moving on to ancient Greece, the caduceus, a staff with two snakes intertwined, associated with the god Hermes. This actually is the one that you see on ambulances. This signified various attributes, including commerce and negotiation. It held symbolic power and was depicted often in Greek art. Now let's consider the mythical concept of a magic wand. While there may not be a direct historical parallel, the symbolic use of staffs and scepters and ancient wands in various cultures does align with the idea of channeling authority and power through an object. In this realm of speculative comparisons I'm doing here, one might draw a parallel to the symbolism of these ancient staffs with the modern television remote, where you can point at your television, speak to it, tell it what you want to see, and the sounds and images appear on a object hanging on your wall. And it shows you exactly what you wanted to see and hear. So this would be a lot more comfortable with air conditioning. Luckily, the ancient people had this too, but they had a much more energy efficient form of it that did not require power. So it was like free air conditioning. This was called a wind catcher, also known as a bedgear or a barjal, depending on where it's at. It's an architectural device used to capture and direct airflow for natural ventilation of buildings. It's commonly found in traditional Middle Eastern architecture, and particularly in regions with hot and arid climates. Wind catchers harness prevailing winds and actually use them to cool and ventilate indoor spaces. They're typically constructed as towers with openings near the top, usually, to catch wind from different directions. And they work through convection and pressure difference. As the wind flows in the tower, it creates a pressure differential, drawing air from inside the building. This movement facilitates cooling as the hot air is replaced by cooler air. It probably doesn't get as cold as some of the air conditioners we have now, but it was free and always worked without power. Wind catchers are a sustainable and energy efficient means of cooling, and it's completely natural, without any need for electricity. They've been used for centuries in various cultures to enhance indoor comfort in high climates, and they're still used today. Now, here's an interesting one. Fighter jets. Yes, fighter jets. Ancient India, the Mahabharata, specifically the passage known as the Vimana or Puspaka Vimana. In these ancient texts, there are references to flying vehicles described as Vimanas that possessed very advanced capabilities, but very familiar capabilities to the modern world. The Vimanas were said to be a flying celestial chariot, a vehicle used by their gods and heroes in epic battles. Descriptions mention them being able to travel vast distances across the sky at insane speeds and unleash powerful weapons. These weapons were described metaphorically as weapons of light. The Puspaka Vimana in particular associates with the character Ravina and Ramayana. So these descriptions of ancient Indian Vimanas and their supposed ability to travel in the sky and unleash powerful weapons of light bear strong similarities to modern fighter jets equipped with advanced laser weapons. This is a newer technology, but it's pretty cool. Fighter jets are advanced aircraft designed for military purposes, capable of high-speed flight and range of tactical maneuvers. This is analogous to a metal flying chariot of war in an ancient vocabulary. These laser weapons on modern fighter jets use directed energy to target and eliminate threats. They are advanced technological tools designed for precision and efficiency. And we have stories of this existing over 4,000 years ago. So, we're talking about weapons. Let's look at nuclear weapons. Now, speaking of ancient India specifically, we have a weapon called the Brahmastra. This was described in the Mahabharata also. First, I need to point out there are in areas of India which are currently safe, but have much higher than usual levels of background radiation. And the sand has been vitrified into glass. This is strange, and science hasn't actually provided a good, mainstream science hasn't provided a very good explanation for why this is. So there's this weapon called the Brahmastra, which everyone had agreed not to use. One side eventually decided to use it because they had to. It unleashed a light said to be 10,000 times brighter than the sun, and it put out a wind that blew over entire cities. Furthermore, it cursed the land. Under this curse, the person would have their hair, fingernails, and teeth fall out. Skin would break, and blisters would form. A person would begin vomiting and die. Those who survived this somehow, which some were said to have survived it, were infertile. And also plants would not grow there. So the land was basically ruined. This curse is acute radiation poisoning. And it also turned the sand into glass, which is characteristic of the very high temperatures involved in nuclear explosions. So we have the effects of nuclear explosion combined with radiation poisoning. This sounds a lot like a nuclear weapon. But that's just one account from one culture. There's lots of myths all over the world. So let's look at a ancient Sumerian cylinder scroll. Now, cylinder scrolls are basically an ancient printing press. It was a solid roller that would have images engraved onto it, and you'd roll it over a clay tablet to quickly make copies of clay tablets. It was a manual handheld printing press. Now, there are depictions of what looks exactly like a nuclear weapon and a nuclear explosion, detailing something dangerous coming out of the explosion. These arrows that you can see probably represent radiation. Now, similar documents are also seen in Pakistan. So there's also other tales from ancient history, such as within the Book of Enki, which that's not exactly a great book to read, but it's really interesting also. Roughly around the same time as the flood, there was another story of a flood from the, Babylonian, Sumerian, one of those two. But one of their leaders named Enki basically tried to upgrade humans. And there's this one human who was supposed to be mixed with this other species, basically. You can kind of think like the Nephilim being created with the fallen angels and humans, and this might actually be what this story is detailing. But what was said to happen is material was taken from him and put into a crystal vessel. Think like a glass vial. And then it was modified and grown. And many of these embryos turned out to be severely deformed, had organ issues, and did not work very well. But a couple of them did work. And keep in mind, this is a 4,500-year-old story. And when one finally did work, it created a very smart, very intelligent human who was fit to rule. So, while technology has come a long way, the technologies we have now have been here for decades. We really don't have any technology that wasn't here in the last 30 or 40 years. It's just gotten smaller, faster, more reliable. 30 years ago, the internet existed. There were phones. There was a space station, rockets, nuclear bombs, all that. So, most of what is here was commonly known in the 80s. And the world population at that time is roughly the same as it was before the Great Flood. And as I've discussed before, technology is driven by population density. Now consider that there were very intelligent hybrid beings of divine descent on the earth at that time that were teaching humans actively. This could further drive technological development. So my theory here, with population density driving technology and the population of the pre-flood era, it would put us at roughly the technology level we had 30 years ago. But when you include very intelligent beings working with humans, they can get a lot more done. So the technology level could have been much higher. Things like teleporters, stargates, stuff like that could have been possible. Now, I mentioned the Nephilim a moment ago. Nephilim means fallen, but in what sense? These are giant half-divine beings who caused humans to fall morally. The fallen angels fell from grace and everything, but that's not what they were actually called, the Irene, not the Nephilim. The Nephilim were the half-human creatures that they spawned, kind of like in the Book of Enki. But fallen also means dead, like a fallen soldier. And keep in mind the Nephilim were considered to be great warriors. A long-lost but great nation of its time could be considered a fallen kingdom. Now consider the advanced society said to have inhabited Atlantis. You can see my video on that. Essentially, when people speak of a lost civilization now, it's the same as the fallen people of the past. So these fallen ones could be a lost civilization, a great and powerful civilization. And they were wiped out because of their sins. So that's all I've got right now. I plan on doing much more of these with more information regarding technologies from the ancient past. And let me know if you have any ideas for technologies you want to see in the next video. Go ahead and like and subscribe, and please share this video with your friends. And thank you, and have a blessed day.